The Reconquista, the Conquista, the Inquisition, the Armada Franco. All of this is the history of a country that occupies a significant part of the Iberian Peninsula. The history of Spain begins with the Phoenicians, who founded colonies on the southern coast of the Iberian Peninsula around 1000 BCE. They established cities such as Cartagena, Córdoba, and Cadiz, which have preserved their grandeur and history to this day. Active trade took place through the Mediterranean Sea and the Strait of Gibraltar, and after the First Punic War, Hannibal expanded Carthaginian control to the eastern part of the peninsula. However, just 20 years later, following the Second Punic War and Hannibal's defeat, control over the Iberian Peninsula began to shift to the Romans. By the beginning of our era, Spain had come under Roman control and quickly became the second most significant region of the Roman Empire, after the Italian peninsula itself. It's worth noting that 3 out of the 5 good emperors of Rome hailed from Spain: Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius. For this reason, as well as due to certain subsequent events, modern Spain is much more reminiscent of the heir to the Roman Empire than Italy. Even after the brief rule of the Visigoths, there was also Byzantine Spain. At this time, the southern part of Iberia was controlled by the surviving remnants of the Roman Empire, which were invited by the rebellious aristocrat Atanagild, who revolted against Aguila. The Byzantines managed to establish themselves in the south of Spain for 50 years, largely due to the fact that Roman order still prevailed in those lands, and the residents were hostile to the Visigoths. Strong trade connections with Constantinople also played a significant role. By the beginning of the 7th century, the Visigoths expelled the Byzantines from the peninsula, and tranquility returned to the Spanish lands, but not for long. In 711, with the arrival of an Arab detachment led by Tariq ibn Ziyad to the Gibraltar Cape, the conquest of the Iberian Peninsula by Muslims and Moors began, marking the beginning of the Muslim conquest of Spain. This subsequently led to one of the longest periods in Spanish history, the Reconquista, which became one of the most complex and lengthy campaigns in the struggle for freedom and independence. We will provide a detailed account of this in a separate video, but here we'll briefly go over it. The Arabs quickly managed to conquer all the lands of the Visigoths, except for a small strip of land in the north of the Asturias Peninsula, which would become the stronghold and starting point of the Reconquista for the next several centuries. The Moors attempted to advance further into Europe, but could only ravage the French provinces adjacent to the Pyrenees, where they were defeated by the army of Charles Martel in 732 near Poitiers. The rise of Christian Spain occurred in the 11th century, thanks to the kings Alfonso I, Sancho III, and Ferdinand I. They made different but incredibly important contributions to the formation of a unified and free Spanish state, from issuing laws to compelling the Moors to pay tribute. Although there was a so-called rollback of the Reconquista at the turn of the 12th century, a mere century later in historical terms, a decisive battle for Spanish independence from the Arabs resounded. On July 16, 1212, the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa took place in the Tolosa Valley. An army primarily composed of troops from the states of the Iberian Peninsula, including crusaders, knights from various orders, and Christians from different countries, defeated the Moorish army. Over the next 20 years, Spain became almost entirely liberated from Arab rule, and the last Moorish state, the Emirate of Granada, finally ceased to exist in 1492. This marked the end of the Reconquista. Another important event at the end of the Reconquista was the unification of the largest kingdoms of the Iberian Peninsula into the unified Kingdom of Spain. This occurred in 1469 with the marriage of Queen Isabella I of Castile and Leon to King Ferdinand II of Castile, Aragon, Sicily, and Naples. Simultaneously with the end of the Reconquista, the era of Spanish conquest of America began. In 1492, Christopher Columbus, after obtaining the necessary funds, organized an expedition to India, but instead discovered the islands of the Caribbean Basin, South America, and North America. Even though Columbus believed he had reached India and not a new continent, this did not hinder Spanish expansion. The colonization of America was called the Conquista. Its direct participants were conquistadors, most of whom were knights who had completed the Reconquista. An important factor contributing to the influx of conquistadors was the fact that once they left Europe, Spaniards were free from the royal and church authority of the Spanish crown. Enterprising Spaniards ventured to the New World in pursuit of untold riches possessed by its indigenous inhabitants. Spanish conquistadors, despite being in the minority, managed to conquer the Aztec, Inca, and Maya peoples. The most famous leaders of the conquista were Hernán Cortés, Hernández de Córdoba, and Francisco de Montejo. With the era of the conquista, the Golden Age of Spain began, during which the Spanish crown became the most powerful political entity in Europe. However, this did not last long. As a result of dynastic marriages, the Spanish monarch became Charles V of the Habsburg dynasty, who became Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire in 1519. He left the Spanish territories, although he remained the King of Spain. This caused widespread discontent among the Spaniards, leading, in part, to the uprising of the Castilian cities, known in history as the Comuneros Revolt. Their demands included ruling directly in Spain, replacing foreign officials with Spanish ones on the islands, weakening absolutism, and regularly convening Cortes. Cortes were the Portuguese and Spanish parliaments. The uprising was suppressed, but shortly afterward, Charles issued a decree of full amnesty while significantly reducing aristocratic privileges. In addition to this, Cortes unquestionably allocated funds to Charles for his war with France. Nevertheless, even this did not prevent Spain from reaching its peak in the 16th century, largely due to its colonies. For a short time, Spain even managed to capture Portugal and annex Portuguese overseas territories. Among the reasons for Spain's decline, which began at the end of the 16th century, several key factors can be identified. The first reason was the division of society between those who had access to the wealth brought from the colonies and those who did not. Spain repeated the fate of the Roman Empire, when one part of the population literally had nothing to eat, while the other part feasted endlessly. The second reason can be called the thoughtless expenditure of gold that flowed abundantly into the treasury from the New World. The Spanish crown spent it on sponsoring the Habsburgs' dominions in Europe and supporting the dominance of the Catholic Church. The country's economy did not benefit, trade and crafts investments dwindled, and trading cities continued to play a significant political role, but they did not strengthen their positions as trade and craft centers. Another important reason was national. After the Reconquista, Muslims who converted to Christianity and remained in Spain continued to work diligently. However, the state saw them as an unreliable segment of society, which often resulted in confiscation of property, increased taxes, and various forms of oppression against this population group. Such people were called Moriscos, which translates to little Moors. Moreover, most market trading points were usually owned by Moriscos, so by suppressing them, the Spanish crown was shooting itself in the foot. With the economic decline, Spain began to lose its political weight on the international stage, and attempts to interfere in the religious affairs of other countries turned out to be a complete failure. Defeats also affected Spain's pride, especially its navy. The Invincible Armada was defeated by the English fleet in 1588, among which pirates played a prominent role. Formally, they were not pirates, but privateers, but they continued to engage in piracy, except against the ships of the English crown and its allies. The 17th century did not bring anything but defeats to the Spanish monarchy. At the beginning of the century, Spain, the wealthiest country in Europe, became bankrupt. To compensate for this, there were further mass confiscations of property from the Moriscos, followed by their expulsion from Spain. However, even this did not help the treasury. Once thriving trading cities fell into decline. In the 40s, Portugal separated from Spain, and Catalonia revolted. For 12 years, the Netherlands, which had become a de facto independent, gained independence from the Spanish crown. Although the monarchy managed to prevent the complete disintegration of the country by relinquishing Portugal, there was no talk of past ambitions anymore. In 1700, the last representative of the Habsburg dynasty on the Spanish throne, Carlos II, died. Due to his lack of heirs, the country plunged into a 14-year war for the Spanish inheritance, which was won by France, placing Philip IV Bourbon on the Spanish throne. The reign of the first Bourbon on the Spanish throne brought positive changes in various areas of the country's life. The role of the church was reduced, the state apparatus was modernized, and trade flourished again. However, this did not last long. By the end of the 18th century, Spain fell into recession again, and in the early 19th century, the country formed an alliance with Napoleonic France. However, the population decided not to tolerate another war for foreign interests, and from 1808 to 1813, the Spanish Civil War began. In addition to freedom-loving Spaniards, the Russians also helped prevent the victory of the French by defeating Napoleon's army. The French were forced to leave the Iberian Peninsula. For the next 100 years, Spain again went through civil wars with constant changes of power and political uncertainty in the country. Only in 1875 did stability return. The government led by Cánovas del Castillo implemented the Peaceful Turn Plan, which created a two-party system in Spain. Within this system, the liberal conservative and liberal parties were to take turns in power, avoiding political disagreements that could lead to another civil war. In practice, this plan implied election fraud and prevented any other political force from coming to power. However, until the beginning of the 20th century, this plan helped Spain avoid major internal strife and ensured stability in the political system. Spain began to develop again. Industries and trade grew, and it became a popular tourist destination. Various reforms were implemented, the most significant of which were judicial reforms. But, as they say, history is cyclical. Spain, once again, after a short period of calm, fell into decline. Defeats in the Spanish-American War, internal uprisings, and the crisis following World War I had a negative impact on Spain. The sequence of these events eventually led to a full-scale civil war in the mid-1930s, the results of which determined the fate and life of the country under the clear skies for the next several decades. Share your opinion on the fate of Spain in the comments. In your view, what is the most significant period in its history? We look forward to your responses.